are, boys and girls. Back together again. Just like it should be. What's that now? All 16 or 17 of us? Think about it. There's like 50 million trillion YouTube subscribers and channels out there. And here we are, our own little circle jerk, having fun while everyone else is uploading videos of their cat and stuff. So, hey, you guys are like, excuse me, stockholders in this channel, buying in early. In like 2 years, you could be telling your friends like, oh yeah, man, I was like the 9th subscriber way back then. The asshole you see now, he was the asshole back then. Totally. Talent was unmistakable and everything. Anyways. Okay, where are we going with this? What I thought I'd talk about today is, let's stay hooked on the car theme for a bit longer and discuss a topic that I get asked about quite a bit, oftentimes from those asking for help and advice, and that's buying and selling cars. Now, I've bought and sold a lot of cars over the years, from shit boxes to garage queens. Did better on some than others, but I've learned something from each one of those that's kind of shaped my current perspective on the process. And my thinking is, I think I'm going to break this down into 2 parts, and we'll talk about the selling of a car in an upcoming video, but I want to focus for now on the buying side of things. So what is my buying philosophy when I'm looking to add a car to the stable? Well, I don't really have a magic bullet answer for that question, but there are a few kind of basic principles that I try to stick to when shopping for a car. And maybe with any luck, some of these pointers and suggestions can help you in your search too. So, obviously some of these sayings are my own biases, and, I might be talking in some broad terms here at times. And so that won't necessarily account for any of the exceptions out there, because there's always exceptions to the rules and special circumstances and stuff. But I think there's also some common horse sense involved that's kind of universal. So that's where I'm kind of going to take this. So here goes. The first thing I tend to do is I need to figure out why I have an itch to buy a car to begin with. And you can buy a car for a lot of really good reasons, but for every good reason, there's probably 10 or 20 really bad ones. Being broke on your ass, that would be a pretty good example of a bad reason to go out and buy a car, okay? Being bored, being depressed, just trying to one-up your neighbor. I mean, you get the idea. These are really bad reasons to go out and spend thousands or tens of thousands of dollars on a car. And you'd be surprised how often people go out and buy a car they have no earthly business buying a car. I just saw in the paper today, the average person has $500 in savings. Not a lot of people can go out and buy a car. So now I know all of you guys are a lot smarter than this. You're average than the average person, but I mean, we can agree that the average person on average is kind of like out of their fucking mind. So I mean, let's just kind of give this kind of the public service message it deserves, and kind of just, if anything I say resonates with you, along with all the other people out there, then everybody's going to win. So, okay, the first point I should probably make is, okay, you shouldn't take the whole car buying experience lightly, because other than your house, other than your car, it's probably going to be the biggest financial decision of your life. So, I mean, it's serious business, and you need to approach it that way. And there's kind of a second part to this, and it's probably worth mentioning kind of right off the top, and that's, I mean, buying the cars that we're talking about, fun cars, luxury cars, secondary collectible or classic type of cars. These are wants, okay, and not needs. And you need to appreciate the distinction. And it doesn't matter if you're looking for a $12,000 1965 Mustang or an M3 or a Boxster, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. These are needs, okay? And needs are not wants.
Strike that. Reverse it. This way, please.
Nobody needs a vintage Mustang or a Boxer to get to work, to pay the bills, to make ends meet. So if nothing else, I mean, at least recognize that, wants are luxuries, okay? And we all like a lot of things. I like a Rolex, I like a Rolex Sub or an Explorer, but I don't need a Rolex to tell the time, okay? So if nothing else, just be sensitive and sensible about the fact that, I mean, as cool as cars are, and as much as folks like you and I like talking about cars and celebrating them, they're just pieces of metal and rubber and stuff, and they're not made of 24 karat gold or anything. So no matter how much you think you need a certain car to justify yourself, just don't make the mistake of falling in love with something that can't love you back, because cars are never going to be able to do that. They don't love you back. They're just objects. But they are pretty fucking cool. So, okay, put that aside. Okay, so we've identified the reasons for shopping for a car. Let's just say it passes the smell test. And we've concluded, okay, we want a two-door sports car, two-seater, maybe a convertible, maybe not, who knows. It doesn't really matter. The point is, I tend to start with a budget and then find the right car within that budget, rather than spending that the other way around and finding the right car and then financially justifying whatever I've chosen. And the reason for that is, I've found if you choose the car first, you're always going to talk yourself into justifying the price for it. That's just human nature. We're going to do whatever accounting tricks or sleight of hand that we need in order to get that car in our garage. So that's when you get into trouble, okay? That's when the budget will go to shit on you. That's when you buy too much car, and that's when you get over your head. So start with a budget first. Okay, so we've come up with a realistic number that we can afford. Let's say, and by the way, that's the key term there, comfortably, okay? I mean, set aside enough for maintenance and repairs and insurance and any of the other recurring costs and stuff like that. But, excuse me, but set aside a reasonable amount of money and a reasonable budget. My first rule of thumb is never buy new cars, okay? In fact, I've never owned a new car in my life. I've leased a couple new cars, but I've never taken the initiative to own something new right off the showroom floor. And the reason for that is, number one, I can't afford it. And number two, the depreciation curve that you buy into when you buy a new car is incredibly expensive over the first 3 or 4 years of that ownership experience. And as soon as you drive it off the lot, doesn't matter what car it is, it's going to be worth 10 or 15% less. It just gets worse over time. So depreciation is just a killer. And I don't like buying things that are pretty much guaranteed financial losses. So that's why I avoid new cars. If you want to buy a new car, just as the exception, and you're going to drive it for 300,000 miles until the wheels fall off, I mean, that's a different situation. And you'll end up making out okay. But again, a 300,000 mile car that you drive every day, that's not going to be a collectible car either. So it's kind of apples and oranges. So I tend to focus my search on used cars only because I can just stretch my dollar a lot further. And I'm kind of a tight ass by nature anyway, so I enjoy the financial game of just seeing how far I can stretch my dollar and see how much car I can get for my money. So that typically means I won't buy any cars that are less than 4 or 5 years old. I want the original owner to take that financial bath at the beginning, that depreciation hit. So I don't have to. And in many cases, that'll be 40 or 50% or more in those first 4 or 5 years from the original price that the original owner paid. So more often than not, I'm looking at cars that are really at least 10 years old. Because when you get to 10 years, it's more or less bottomed out on the depreciation curve. And so the value of the car in the market, it's not really going to eat you alive anymore. And it's sort of like hedging your bets. And it's kind of like an insurance policy, like an inexpensive one it doesn't cost you much. So if you want to look at it that way, if you buy a 10-year-old car and suddenly something happens, you need a kidney transplant or something, your sister needs gender transition surgery, well, you can sell that car and get most of all your money back. So the financial risk isn't really that big because it's not going to cost you much out of pocket if you have to flip that car really quick if something unforeseen happens. So it just goes back to targeting cars that have bottomed out or close to it in the market, and that's why I like cars that are probably 8 to 10 years old at least. Now, the downside to that, obviously, excuse me, I'm having a cold. Cars out of warranty, stuff like that, they break, you have to fix them. But the out-of-pocket stuff is probably not going to be nearly as much as the savings that you save by buying a car that was 8 to 10 years old. So 10-year-old cars are kind of a nice starting place because they're kind of in this middle ground. They're old enough to be mostly depreciated, but they're still new enough where they've got solid reliability, they got modern creature comforts, and all the stuff that most of the newer cars still have. So it's kind of a nice sweet spot there, where you're not being asked to make a ton of concessions either way. So if I'm looking for something that's, say, older than 10 years, maybe it's a real classic car, maybe it's 15 or 20 or 30 years old, well, you just do more research about it and find out as much about the car as you can, so you're prepared for any of those surprises. And I mean, all those cars by then should have bottomed out value-wise or already be on the upswing. So you have that assurance that the maintenance costs are really going to be the only thing that you float in order to stay above water. And I also like targeting cars that are either they're underappreciated or they're undervalued. And this is kind of a seat of the pants sort of thing. Not really sure how I can tell you to do this. I guess the best example would be like if you asked me to what 911 you should buy, I'd probably steer you towards the 964 model just because it really hasn't caught on yet. The prices are still kind of affordable for it. Your dollar's going to go much further. And you're going to get more 911 for your money than if you went out and bought like a 3.2 Carrera before the 964 or a 993. And for me, bang for the buck, that's one of the biggest ingredients here in all of this. So if I'm shopping for a 993 Turbo right now, I'm going to pay off the charts. So I'm just penalizing myself for buying at the top of the curve rather than at the bottom. I don't want to buy at the top. If I'm buying at the top, it's too late for me. I don't want to get in at that price. So I try to acquire cars that are towards the bottom of the valuation curve and are cars that are kind of under the radar a bit. And a lot of times these are cars that are they're too new to be collectibles or classics and stuff, but they're too old to be relevant compared to what replaced them, the new stuff. So it's kind of a car domain's no man's land where it's passing from like the newest, greatest thing it once was, and now it's going to kind of the more classic collectible graveyard, but it's not really in either place. So if you buy a car that's already a collectible, well, you're going to pay more for that. And if you buy a car that's brand new, well, you're obviously going to pay more. So I try to buy in that middle area where the interest is lowest, and that just tends to mean a better deal for me. And sometimes that means you've got to focus on cars that might not be the in thing that everybody's looking for. But I mean, if you're a car guy like me, I mean, cars, all cars are cool. So I really don't have a problem having a little bit of flexibility there in what I acquire, just because, I mean, I can have fun in just about any car. So if I have to buy a car that might be one model cycle newer or older or something like that, at the end of the day, you're going to have fun in it no matter what. The next thing, let's see. The next thing I like to do is I like to target cars that have like a significance of some kind. What I mean by that is just it might be a model or it's got a special angle to it where it's more desirable than other cars in its class. In the case of the BMW I bought, I focused on the M3 rather than just the generic 3 Series. And I could have paid the same and bought a newer 335i that's got as much power as the M3 I bought, but the M3 has the attraction, it's designed and marketed in a different way. It looks different. It's got a following all to its own. So if I'm going to tie up thousands or tens of thousands of dollars in a car, I want something that's got a shelf life on the used car market. And I want something that's going to be able to be marketed and easy to sell if for some reason I had to get out of it. But yet it might also be a car that will recover some of the depreciation. So, I mean, not every car is going to appreciate, but you kind of mitigate your risk a bit there by focusing on cars that have kind of an odds-on better chance of doing so. So just look for something that's kind of got an angle or two going for it. It might be a model that's it could be like a special edition model. It might be like a factory upgrade, a performance upgrade car. It might be a special option or a color combination. I mean, it could be almost anything. And all of you are smart enough to figure out what that is. But my point is just, the bigger the distinction between that and the more garden variety model is the way I help insulate myself and give myself a better chance of owning something that's got a bit longer term shelf life on the used car market. Now, once I have a budget for a specific car I'm looking for, then I try to buy the best example I can afford in that budget. I've never had any luck with fixer-uppers. Now, for some people, I mean, that's their thing, and if that's your thing, do your thing, man. Some people are shade tree mechanics, and that could be your ticket. But for me, I just don't want to buy a problem, and I don't want a project. I've got enough hobbies as it is. Some of them, they feel like unpaid jobs as it is, so fixing things that are broken, that's just not something I want to take on myself. So I tend to hold on to cars for several years. I'm not really a flipper, so I'm in this longer term. And if you're like me and you're in it longer term, it kind of just pays to try to buy something that's a little nicer at the beginning and more well kept and maintained. You're going to save yourself some problems in the end, and you're going to probably save yourself some money too. Speaking of age, you can't fake the condition. No, you can't. So if you see a car that's lived a sheltered life, and you know from talking to the owner, and they're the kind of personality that like parallels that condition, then you might be onto something. Now, if somebody's selling a car, oh, this is a perfect 10 out of 10 car, and you drive up to their house and looks like they've only cut their front lawn once in the last month, okay, that's like red flags, red sirens ought to be going off for you and telling you, hey man, things may not be adding up here. I can't stress that enough. You need to pay as much attention to the person selling the car as the car itself. These type A personalities, I might be one, I don't know. You can't flip the switch off. I mean, these orderly people are orderly in everything they do, so when you go check a car out, I mean, I'm like an undercover, head shrinker, man. I'm reading body language. I'm, listening between the notes. I'm looking for everything. So if the car owner is sending those same signals as the car he's supposedly selling, then that's a good thing. But if he's not or she's not, then I'll just walk out. And that's not being a pretentious asshole or anything. I mean, that's my way of protecting my wallet. And I've walked away from, I'm sure I've walked away from good cars over the years that, the owner just gave me a bad vibe. But I mean, that's the challenge. That's kind of the fun. I mean, no matter how good a car is, if you wait long enough, there's going to be other cars. At the end of the day, it's my money, and I don't owe anybody anything. If it doesn't feel right, you got to have the discipline to just walk out and live to fight another day. That's all there is to it. So, of course, if you find the right car and the right seller, then, you just need to do all your typical things that, you do. You look over it thoroughly, you take it for a test drive, you get it inspected by a reputable shop and all that stuff. But even then, those things, those are no guarantees. Shops and dealerships, they'll do inspections on cars, and it can just depend on, the attitude or the aptitude of the guy, the mechanic, who's on the clock that day, because the mechanic can give a car flying colors, but that doesn't necessarily mean it might be as good as it says it is. So, you got to take some of that with a grain of salt too, and just use your gut. And if a car doesn't feel right, pass on it. Just pass on it. You listen to your gut, because it's going to tell you what you need to do. I say I look at probably 5 or 10 cars before I end up buying a car. And I mean, not all of those cars I'll see in person or get inspected, but it's probably a rough estimate on the number I would like inquire about and look into to get an initial conversation going with the owner. You know, I might make a phone call, I might go out and see it or something, but I'm usually taking my time and weeding out the cars that I don't like to try to find the perfect car for me. Price, I mean, wheeling and dealing, I mean, my whole thing is, I mean, I'm already so deliberate and cautious when I'm buying that by the time I've done all my homework, I've done my due diligence, and I've decided, okay, this is the car for me. You know, this is, you know, it's almost a secondary concern at that point what the price is. I mean, if the price was so crazy to begin with, I probably would have walked away, you know, long ago. So if I'm still hanging around with this car when it's time to deal, well, I mean, the asking price, kind of by definition, had to be fairly close to my budget. So, you know, I'm ready to play ball. What I don't do is I never throw out a best offer. In fact, I don't even throw out a first offer if I can afford it. I want the seller to, I want him to throw a number out first. I want him to post a number because I can always come up, but I can't come down. So I'll usually say something like, oh, so you're asking, you know, such and such a price, whatever, you know, what do you need to walk away with, you know? And when I do that, I'm actually getting two prices out of him before I say anything. I'm getting the asking price, you know, that he posted on his ad, but then I get his first concession price that he's willing to take. And sometimes a seller will just say, well, you saw my asking price, make me an offer. Well, if they do that, then you've got no choice. You've got to come up with a number. But there's no sense playing that hand if you don't have to. So don't encourage it. You know, sometimes it's better to shut up. So try to get at least one price concession before you make your first offer. That's one bit of advice for you. Kind of a caveat here, I'm not really too cutthroat in negotiations. I mean, if I know a car is kind of a slam dunk for my garage, then a few $100 for me is not the kind of thing like I'm going to piss at everybody's Wheaties over just so I can say, oh, I won the negotiation, you know, I'm the best negotiator. I mean, I don't even care if the seller thinks he won, that's fine. I mean, if you got to take your pride out of this, do it. I mean, as long as you get the car at a price you're willing to afford, you think it's a good, fair deal, you're not overpaying, then don't play the stupid high or low game for hours or days on end for a few $100s. I mean, it's just pointless. And, you know, for the kind of cars I'm talking about, if you're spending, you know, 20, 30, 40,000 and up on a car and you're beating somebody up over $500, I mean, you may get to a point where the seller just says, you know, hey man, I'm done. I've decided to sell to somebody else. And I've done that. I've refused to sell cars to certain buyers just because they've nickeled and dimed the living shit out of me. And these are just asshole buyers. There's only so many times you can split the difference until you've basically just conceded everything away and conceded defeat. So the last thing I want to do is piss off the seller. I mean, it's not going to be to your advantage to do that. And if the seller is the kind of car guy I am, and chances are he probably is if I've done my homework anyways, then it's, you know, make a good effort just to keep it on good terms. So that said, I never give ever give anybody the body language that might suggest that I absolutely have that car. I have to have it, even if I really absolutely have to have it because it's checked every box and is in my price range. I mean, I don't care if Steve McQueen wants to own a car. It's the nice example on earth. You got to maintain that poker face, dude, and just get through it and act like, yeah, man, you know, it's nice, but shit, you know, it's just a car, man. If I don't buy it, I'll just, you know, I'll commission a yacht or something. It's no big deal. I mean, that's kind of the attitude that you have to have, because once the seller knows you're emotionally involved in this and you want the car there more than he wants to sell it specifically to you, and that's the key, because, I mean, the seller couldn't give a shit who they sell it to as long as they get their money. And, you know, that's when you're screwed, because you're probably going to get bent over and overpay if they know that you want the car more than they want to sell it specifically to you. So, you know, just don't nickel and dime the sellers over $500 or something like that. Just put your poker face on, be good at it, and bluff your way through the process to, like, you know, make sure you hold the face cards. because nothing is certain. I mean, you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them, so to speak.
Got to know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em.
But I mean, some good method acting can go a long way here. So I mean, if it's a car that's really high on your interest level, and there's a bidding war, then there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, you're going to have to put some numbers on the table and yank dicks and all that good stuff. But I mean, that's kind of the exception to the rule. So if it's just you and a third party worrying about the price of the car, don't try to beat them up too bad on it. Now, if you're the kind of person that can walk into a Lamborghini dealership and throw $350, on the table, that's couch cushion money, and buy a new car, nothing I said applies to you. We're swimming in totally different ponds. So this advice is just like for folks out there like myself who are like trying to float the lifestyle as best they can without like sending money down a black hole. So those are kind of just some of the things I look for, and kind of some of the tools I use that fit my budget and my interest when I'm looking for a car. The bottom line is you just want to buy the coolest car you can at the bottom of the cycle, or the value cycle, which is going to give you the best chance of protecting your money. And my goal is to get it, the best cars at the least amount of money, usually 10 years old or older. And, just interrogate the seller, observe them, react to them, digest what they say, and then, put your best Oscar performance on, man, and just work the stage, and make it obvious that the seller needs to sell that car more than you need to buy it. Even though that might be a crock of shit and you really want to buy it more, he wants to sell it. So like I said, just do those things and I think you'll be fine. I'll do an upcoming video on some of my best practices for selling a car and trying to get top dollar for it. And a lot of it might be common sense and stuff, but some of it's probably worth repeating, and others might get something out of it too. So yeah, I mean, just let's grow this channel, man. Let's, break all the rules. Wait until we start talking about things other than cars, man. You have no idea how sick and twisted this is going to get. So if you have questions or comments, don't hesitate to post them in the comment section. I'll try to respond to them. Please like this video if you liked it. Give it a thumbs down if you thought it sucked. And be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Take care.